So thank you for the kind opportunity, Dr. Shiva, to meet you here in Rome. First of all, how come you are in Italy? And above all, how come you started from Sardinia on your tour?
It's a good question. I've been to Italy, the mainland here, probably about 7 times. But I've always wanted to go to Sardinia for a number of reasons. First of all, just seeing the beauty of it, just from an aesthetic standpoint. But the other is Sardinia, I think, is in a very unique position geographically. I mean, it's in a very strategic position, if you think about it, that has served U.S. imperialism and NATO imperialism for, unfortunately, too long. But it's also a place, from a medicine standpoint, that has a history of longevity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So my background, interestingly enough, always has intersected politics and medicine. And so, to me, Sardinia intersects both of those, and the fight for truth and freedom and the desire to really understand health. You may know that I grew up in India, where India had a caste system. I grew up in an indigenous traditional system, and I was fascinated as a kid to understand why these inequities existed. But I also grew up in a world where my grandmother was the local village shaman. She was the one who people called upon to heal them. So I was fascinated by medicine. You see, so the intersection was always health, medicine, and truth and freedom, which is trying to understand why there's systems of oppression. In many ways, Sardinia, which I didn't know to the extent, is also at the intersection of both. I had come here on the interest to really understand, as a biologist, as a systems biologist, as someone who's studied health for most of my life, to understand people have written about these things called quote-unquote blue zones, Sardinia having the longest, the highest number per capita people who live over 100 years. And it's a very interesting, isolated culture in some ways, but it also has a very rich history, which has unfortunately been hidden. So those are the things that made me really want to come to Sardinia. And I learned a lot on this trip, particularly how US and NATO imperialism has been taking advantage of the island and the people, and also the rich history of people wanting to resist and fight back. So that's
Is this an European tour or just Italy and Sardinia?
Well, my intention was, we have a movement that we've created, a global movement for truth, freedom, health.
And we'll talk about it.
Yes, and we realized that I've always felt that I've been looking for a place, because for Europe, which can be sort of a meeting point, and Sardinia looks like it may be that location, and we want to do more conferences here, because it's sort of an interesting area people probably want to get inspired to come to, and it's also sort of in the center of East and West in many ways.
Okay. So the second question is, you have recently announced that you are running as an independent in the 2024 president elections. Why not with the Republican, given that in both 2017 and 2020 you ran for the Massachusetts Senate as a Republican candidate?
Well, first of all, in 2017 and 18, when I ran for U.S. Senate, I wanted to run as a Republican. But the Republican Party and the Democrat Party are actually one party.
Man.
They're a uniparty. And you would have thought that the Republican Party, which claims, the ethos of meritocracy, that they're into, they define themselves as people who work hard, bottoms up. Well, it turns out that there is no such distinction, especially in Massachusetts. If you think about Massachusetts, where the first shot was fired, to start the American Revolution. Mm-hmm. Massachusetts, in many ways, when that revolution took place, it's not like the British got up and left after they lost. In fact, they entrenched themselves more in Massachusetts, if you think about, Harvard's there, etc. And so what's happened is the left and the right, in many ways, they're actually completely one in Massachusetts. But in Massachusetts, they portray as though they're different. And this is part of something we should discuss more as we get into this interview. But the reality is that when I ran, you would have thought, I never wanted to, by the way, ever run for electoral politics. I've always been a builder of movements since I've been a 17-year-old kid, bottoms up. I do not believe that you can win top down, even if you want to win these positions. For the kind of positions I take, politically, you have to have a movement. So we decided to run because it was an interesting time. Donald Trump had announced he was going to run, and it seemed globally as well as nationally, working people were looking for anti-establishment forces. And I believe that Donald Trump or his advisors or whoever you want to say controls him were aware of this. So that's why they dropped him in, and he spoke a lot of the anti-establishment rhetoric. But the reality was he's not anti-establishment. If anything, he's fully part of the establishment. So when I ran, we ran against a woman called Elizabeth Warren, who's the sitting senator from Massachusetts, but she got her position at Harvard, where she's a professor, by claiming she was a Native American.
I know.
Okay? And now my run against her was not to expose the issue of race, which she took advantage of, but the issue of integrity. And so...
Real Indian and not fake.
Yeah, so we made a great... I would say it's probably one of the best ad campaigns in political history.
That was nice.
We called it Only the Real Indian Can Defeat the Fake Indian. We had a picture of me with her.
Yeah.
And people just loved it.
Yeah.
And the city of Cambridge tried to take down our banner, saying we were violating some random law. I sued them in federal court and we won. The interesting thing is the Republican establishment ran an idiot against her because they have no intention of winning. You see, it's all about backroom deals are made. And this is what people need to understand. In fact, they ran a guy who photoshopped a picture with Trump, fake handshake. Yes, to convince people that he was a Trumper. And so, because, the pro-Trump movement was there. So anyway, so we ran as independents. So to just correct you, in 2017, we ran as independents. In 2020 is when I said, okay, I'll give the Republicans a shot. I ran as a Republican.
Yeah.
And that's when we discovered serious election fraud in the entire system. And it was our campaign which exposed this long before Trump. In fact, Trump used a lot of our stuff and raised about $500 million. And I can talk to you later, and I had 2 meetings with him because he was all excited of the work I'd done. But at the end of the day, we ran initially as an independent, and then we ran as a Republican. It was the Republicans who colluded with the Democrats to commit election fraud on me.
Nice.
So both parties are 2 heads of the same serpent.
Okay. Then straight to the point. Your chances of being elected are infinitesimal. Why then the investment of money and commitment?
Yeah, so let's look at your question. First of all, let's look at why you're asking that question. And I want to sort of dissect that. First of all, when a human being, any human being in the modern world comes to a point where they decide that they don't accept the world the way it is.
Status quo.
Yes. So you have 2 sets of human beings. Some people accept the way the world that it is and are fine. Say, well, the world sucks and I can't change it, so I'm going to maintain my own little garden here and, I'm going to live in quiet desperation. Or people go to the other extreme where they may do terrorist activities, right? But once people get beyond that and they say, yes, I want to change the world, what are the 2 options that the establishment gives them? One is you can file lawsuits. You can get involved in the court system. Something has happened to you that's not correct. So they encourage you to find a lawyer and file lawsuits. That's one vehicle. The other is they say, well, why don't you write to your congressman, right? Run for office. Electoral or legalistic. So these are the 2 options the average person is given. Now, in 1981, when I was about 17 years old, when I first came to MIT, I was very interested in politics since I was a 4-year-old kid, since I grew up in this caste system. And you may remember at that time, Ronald Reagan was running for office, as well as Walter Mondale, Republican and Democrat. And there was a 3rd candidate running called Jesse Jackson. Yeah. Now, Jesse Jackson claimed he was building a movement, called it the Rainbow Coalition. And a number of activists like myself were, maybe something will happen here. But at the end of the day, on the evening of the Democratic National Convention, Jesse Jackson basically says, well, we have to choose the lesser of 2 evils. And he gives all of his votes to Walter Mondale. And I haven't confirmed this. The rumor was that he was offered a private jet for doing this, okay? So what I recognized as a kid was that the establishment is very clever. They have these 2 shoulders. So if the head is one, they have the Republican and Democrat obvious establishment. Like today's world, it's like the Hillary Clintons and the Obamas in the United States and Democrats. And on the right, you have people like Mitch McConnell and those kind of people. But the establishment has gotten much more clever over the last 100 years. They've also don't only have the shoulders, but they have the wings. So on the left, they have people like AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or in the old days, Jesse Jackson or Bernie Sanders, who'll bark at their own Democratic establishment. But they just do that just enough to manipulate people to think they're fighting against the establishment. And like Jesse Jackson did at the last minute, they'll always say, well, we have to choose the lesser of two evils. And you can see that Bernie Sanders did the same thing. In the 2016 election. He said a lot of stuff against Hillary. At the last minute, he said, well, we have to support her.
Yeah.
And I had many friends who said, oh, Bernie will never do that. I said, mark my words, he's going to do that. And then on the other wing, the right wing had the Tea Party at one point, but they needed a new person to rile up the right, and that's the role of Donald Trump.
So in short, if I would understood, even if you have no chances, you have the moral duty to do this.
It's more deeper than that. So once you understand this dynamic, you recognize that every 2 to 4 years, the establishment has gotten very clever at taking the broad mass of people and diverting them, that their citizenship is about voting on this one day. And after that, you go back to watching football, or in the old days, going to watch gladiators in the Colosseum, right? So they've created this very defined moment where they use that moment to make people think they have a civic duty. Now, I'm a big, not only a believer, but from a scientific and engineering standpoint, when major changes occurred, it's always been bottoms-up movements.
Yeah.
Period. So my view is it's very strategic. Now, put it to you this way. For a guy like me, who has all my degrees at MIT, who clearly has very clear positions and platforms and solutions, but I'm not part of the left or the right, and I'm independent. There's absolutely no way that if I ever joined either party, that I could even ever get my ideas out, because you always have to compromise in that electoral process. However, if someone like me ever wanted to win, the only way to do it would be through building a movement. You'd have to have a movement. Okay? So our goal in running at this important historical point is that I've created now probably 300-400 million people all over the world know about Dr.SHIVA and the Truth, Freedom, and Health brand. Because they saw what I did in 2020. They saw what I did in 2021. I was the first one to call out Fauci. So I've built a tremendous awareness, and also people know they can trust me. I'll always call out the bullshit long before others will, because I'm not an opportunist. I actually want to see the world change. So because of that, we have a unique opportunity. Running for president gives us this very unique opportunity in history, given the following that I have, to expose the left and the right with uncompromising exposition. So if you notice, I was the first guy to expose Elon Musk recently, since December.
I have a
So I was the first one to expose Robert Kennedy. This guy's a fake. The Kennedys as a whole are a fake. They're a mythology. I was the first one to expose Fauci when it was not popular. I was the first one to expose the election systems fraud. I was the one who discovered in my own lawsuit that the government has a backdoor portal in Twitter. So I built a huge following of people who say, this guy will always tell us the truth. So if I even wanted to ever win president with my values, there's no way I could do it without building a movement. So this running for president is going to do two things. First, it's going to educate lots of people about the fact that the left and right screw you every day, Democrats and Republicans. And the other thing is we're going to explosively grow our movement. So we win anyway. We already won with all the work I did in 2020. We already won with all the work I did in 2021 because we've raised human consciousness. And it is about raising consciousness, period.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. Before we continue with this, I want to just remind everyone that because of the massive censorship and shadow banning that still continues on social media platforms, I'd like you to click the link to continue watching this on our own platform at